Hello and welcome to another one of our DC Who's interactive events. Tonight we will be spending a lot of time together, learning and practicing and being creative. So we want to thank you for just sharing that and being brave with us tonight. Tonight's event is created and spearheaded by our talented Who's 2.0 committee chairs. We have Kim Somerville and Lori Gibson, and Lori will be painting with everyone tonight. So definitely say hello. And our guest this evening is an incredible creative human being. Samantha Testa spends her time here in DC working live events, teaching and crafting gorgeous calligraphy and painting, of course, her commissioned watercolor illustrations. She is passionate about all things that are beautiful. She is a former first grade teacher, so you will get a little bit of that vibe this evening, as she is great at giving directions and just gravitating towards people and making these meaningful connections. So I'm sure that you will feel that energy and warmth during this workshop. And before I hand over the mic, so to speak, I do want to take a brief moment just to go over a couple of housekeeping things so you'll understand the flow of this evening. As I said, we did mute everyone as they came in, but we want this to be interactive. So if you have any questions or you don't understand something, please feel free to come off of mute, to send a message in the chat below. And we hopefully will be able to get through as much as possible. But for those that registered, just know that you will get an email from us following this evening with the recording of tonight, just in case you don't finish your pieces in their entirety. There's no stress there. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Samantha. So welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's always exciting to see, I've written all your names on your packet, so now I get to put faces to names. It's really fun. So like Kim said, I was a first grade teacher for a long time, and that carries over a little bit, which gives me, the skill set I need to teach you how to do watercolor, but also you're not 6. So if I'm doing something and I'm going too slow, you go ahead, you do what you need to do. But I have set this class up so you can succeed. And so I will do a lot of demonstrations and give you time to do those things as well. Probably set like time limits. So I might say at 6:05, we'll come back here and do this, that, and the other. But across the board, this is your time to be creative. It's your time to try something new or maybe pick up something you haven't done in a long time. And if you have any questions, like they said, please just let me know and we will address them. But we are going to be painting the Rotunda. I'm so excited. So I love architecture. I specialize in house portraits when I do watercolor, but I especially love bricks. I love brickwork. And this one has a unique type of brickwork, and I'll show you how to lay the foundation for bricks and give the illusion of bricks without having to be too detailed. So you're going to learn in 2 hours today as much as I can possibly give you about the tools you're using, so you know why you're using them, and also the process in which we're going to practice, and then the process in which to paint and get your rotunda ready to go. We probably will not get through the whole painting today, just to give you an FYI, but I will record anything on the back end that might need to be done still and give you directions on how to complete that and make it look great. So yeah, in your packet, you should have a couple things. Let's just make sure you have all that, because I am human. I do forget sometimes. Whatever you don't have, I can easily send to you. But to make sure you have the basics, you should have 2 paintbrushes. Similar to these or different. I usually choose a couple different variations. We'll talk about the tools later. You should have a postcard with the rotunda, just so you can see what I'm talking about when I give you different areas to paint. You can have an exemplar. You should have your outline. Mine is a little darker. There might be other ones that are lighter, varying shades of opacity, just so you can see the imprint on your really nice paper there. You should also have a journal, a watercolor journal. I don't have mine out, but you get the deal. You also should have a palette, a circular palette of paints. Mine is enormous over here, but again, being human, some of you might see little X marks on your palette. That means I switched colors accidentally. So when we do practice, I'm going to recommend that when we do your color wheel, you're going to just swatch colors and go around, because no matter what I sent you here with your color wheel, it's still going to look different when you apply it to different papers even. So when we're practicing, you're going to get to see those colors in real life on your paper. You also have a pencil, and I believe that's it. If there's anything else you're curious about or not sure what it's for, let me know. And then additionally, you should have a glass of water. You're going to change that out after we do some practice. And then you should have a paper towel. Any questions so far? Okay. I want to talk to you about materials, because good materials, really expensive materials, does not make an artist, right? You can use a $5 Michaels palette and create beautiful things. Don't let anyone tell you differently. But I have curated this supply list for you as a professional set. So now if you wanted to go back to that $5 Michaels palette, great. If from here on out you want to continue with the professional set, it's less intimidating to go into an art store, go into Blick online and know what you're looking for. So to begin, in my workbook here, I have a couple simple, oh, you also have a workbook, something outlining what we're going to be doing today and the materials I have. My information is on the front. And first and foremost, let's talk about materials. So on page 1, or the first materials page, let's talk about the different types of paper. So this is my first class where I was able to print out an outline for you on really nice paper. Paper like this doesn't go through printers very easily, but what you have in your workbook, in that journal, and then also as that loose sheet, this is 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. It's toothy in texture, so that means it's going to hold so much great moisture, and it's going to have a good memory for your moisture as well. So if you paint a tree up here in the left corner, you can go down to the tree on the right and then back up to that tree later, and still it won't be a stark difference between the last time you painted because it's still a little bit wet. On the negative side of that, we might have to wait a little longer for things to dry before two colors touch so they don't bleed together. I have troubleshooting for all of that though. But your paper, first and foremost, should be archival in that it should be acid-free. Most watercolor papers are acid-free. That just makes sure it doesn't yellow over time. No matter what paints you use, if it's acid-free, it'll stay pretty great for years to come. In general, we don't keep watercolors where locations in your house that are prone to moisture. It's really nice to have a watercolor in your bathroom. You could do that as long as it's away from the sink, away from the shower, and then also not in direct sunlight. Even with archival paints and paper, if it's in bright sunlight for years, over time it could fade. So just some little tips when you're doing your watercolor: keep it out of light, keep it out of moisture. Over time, it will withstand longer. But you can also use, I put here 80-pound is good for printing. If you have a mixed media paper where you don't have a hardcore printer like I do at home, and you're going to get your watercolor paper stuck in there. But if not, you can use an 80-pound mixed media paper that still retains water well, but goes through your printer. So if you find an image online, you're like, oh, that's a great outline, I want to paint that. You can print that on mixed media paper and then paint it up yourself. Now, with your paper, obviously the front of your drawing is the front of your paper, but in general, you're always painting on the more textured side. If you open up your journal, just to take a look, when you open that first page of the watercolor pad, obviously the front first page is your front, right? Sometimes people go through and will put a little X at the bottom corner of each of the front pages because it is hard to tell once you rip it out. I've painted on the wrong side of the paper before. Nothing bad happens, but you'll realize as you're painting, you're not getting the same effect, because the backside of that journal paper, if you look, is more manufactured. It's a little more lattice work as opposed to toothy. You'll start to recognize the difference over time, but just always make sure you're painting on the textured side that's meant to retain the water. So let's go through all the materials, and then I'll open up for questions. Your brushes today are Princeton or Royal Langnickel, both student or professional grade, somewhere in between. There are levels of brushes. Just get yourself, if you're looking for more brushes, I have a blog post I'll send for the recap email on where I find all my supplies, but you're really just looking for a soft brush, watercolor specific. Squirrel hair is great. Synthetic brushes are perfectly fine. It does not have to be expensive and bougie to work the way you want it to. So you have a smaller one and you have a larger one. I would say this is more medium. And the medium one is going to be what you use for those bigger spaces. We're going to use this for the first most of the painting. And then the smaller one is what you use when you go back in and you're doing smaller details. So the brickwork, or maybe little pockets on your bushes. So just the only thing to remember about brushes is to use the appropriate size at the appropriate time. Don't try to get this big guy in to make the little teeny bricks. Use your smaller one because that's what it's for. I'm still guilty of trying to get little spaces with my big brush, just know that. And really, I like round brushes. I have a whole slew of all kinds of brushes. I have probably like 150 and I use 7. So really just find brushes that you like. They can be flat, they can be round, whatever you prefer. You start to develop that preference over time. And your paints. I'm excited to be offering these professional grade Daniel Smith paints to you. And actually, I didn't write down there that these are Daniel Smith, if you wanted to jot that in there. And these come to me as tubes. So if you can see in the video here, this is a tube of professional grade watercolor paint. These can be up to $20 a bottle. No beginner or no one who hasn't picked up watercolor in a while is comfortable, myself included, when I got started again. I would never have gone into a professional art store and bought a $20 tube of paint that I just wasn't sure how to use. So what you have now is a curated professional palette for this particular job that we're going to be doing today. And what I did is I took it out of this tube, I put it in your palette, I let it dry for 48 hours, and I sent it off. If any of your colors popped out, maybe your little dime-sized dab popped out of its place, all you're going to do later is put a little water droplet at the bottom of it and push it back in there, and it'll adhere right back to that plastic. What's great about your palette itself is that the top comes off and can act as your mixing palette. You can also use the well in the middle if you really wanted to as well, but that starts to get cramped for space. And then once it dries, you take a paper towel, you wipe it up, and you're good to go. Another thing about paints, you can paint right from the tube. Absolutely. This is watercolor. You can use it as right out of the tube. I prefer dry pan for people who are beginning or haven't done it for a while because you can control it better and you're not wasting paint. When it's wet, it's easy to go up a bunch of paint too much. Whereas now we're taking the dry palette, we just really have to get into that color with the moisture on your brush. And I think that's it. Please chat me some questions, or if you wanted to just yell out and ask. Something I learned about Zoom, you probably already know this, but I was very excited to learn that you can press the space bar to chat. It'll unmute you for a hot second, and then as soon as you release the space bar, you go back to mute. So if you have any questions about materials, give them to me. All right. When you're ready, let's take a look at the technique page. So something you need to know about my watercolor upbringing is that I took fine art classes in college. I was classically trained in watercolor as well as sculpture, as well as oils. And I've tried all these things and I know the techniques. But when I went to reteach myself a few years later, I may have lost the names of those techniques, but I remembered the things that were fundamental in making a watercolor. And so I put those together for you. So one thing might be called something else elsewhere. I call it that because once I start putting words in my head, I just say them the same way. So here we are on a watercolor technique and things that you're going to have to use today when you're doing your work. What I'm going to do for this section is for these first 4, and actually if you wanted to spotlight here, Kim, if you don't mind, on my hands here, let me make sure I'm set up right. So when I look at my actual desk setup, it is important to note how you're going to set this up. I'm right-handed, so everything I have is on the right side here. And you basically never want to be reaching over your paper to get ink. So keeping my palette on the right side, keeping my water on the right side, keeping my paper towel on the right side as well. So that when I'm working, you're not reaching over, and this is all in your access point here. So to begin, I do want to point out a couple of things when we're talking about watercolor. The 2 most important, I'm going to write these in Sharpie because they are important. Number 1, you're always going to go light to dark. This is because watercolor is not opaque. It is transparent when applied with moisture. So if you paint your tree a really dark green to start, then you figure out, oh shoot, I wanted some yellow in there. You can't put the yellow on afterwards. So watercolor takes just an extra beat to stop and think about your process and the order in which you want to do things. Step 2 is to remember that the white space that you see in any of this painting, so your rotunda, all of the white space you see was left white. That means I use the white of the paper, because once you enter into color on that white space, you can't get it back. And I think those are the two cardinal rules of watercolor we're going to start with. And now we're going to get into some of these techniques. And when I do a technique, if you want to get your area set up to get working, I want to show you about a minute of each. I'll show you how to demonstrate each technique. I'll give you about a minute to do it yourself, and we'll come back and do the next one so you can start to see how this works. Now, really, these dry pan watercolors, nothing is going to happen unless you apply the moisture. And probably the number one question I get once people start demonstrating is, how much water do I know to put on? The answer is, you have to play with it. This is something that happens over time. You start to get the hang of how much water your brush can hold, how much it expels on your paper, and then how much you really want on your paper, depending on what you're doing. So the answer is that's the key. Figuring that out and getting more practice with it will help you figure out, different moisture techniques for different skills. So the first technique, the one some people say is the most boring, which it is, but it's a necessary boring. It is a flat wash. And this is where you're going to take your larger brush, you're going to dip it in some water, you're going to pick up the color, and you're going to wash it across as flat as possible. And to avoid something like stroke marks or lines in your work, you just want to, and let me start. So I'm going to put my water in. I picked up a bunch of water, so it's not dripping off, but so I can see the water on my brush. And now I'm going to dip it into this is my maroon. And I'm picking up as much color as I can, because now when I go to wash it across, I'm going to wash. Now I can tell immediately I need more water. This paper I'm using is really porous, or it's very textured. So I actually can add a little bit more water. And then when I flat wash the next line, I just want to do that before the first one dries. That's called your bead. The edges of your watercolor are your bead. And if you want a flat wash, you want to make sure you have an even amount of water, and you're just going back and forth so that bead doesn't dry before you do that next stroke. And I went over some of the other strokes. That's perfectly fine. You can smooth it out with a little bit more water, but I would avoid going over it too much, because then you go into kind of the territory of overworking your paper. So because this is the intro technique, take about 2 minutes to try some flat washes. And as you're practicing, just make sure you've tried one of every color as we go through these techniques. So to remind you what a flat wash is, you're dipping your brush in the water to make sure you have moisture to pick up that color. You really get your brush into that color and then wash it across the paper. Pick up some more color and water if you need to. Stroke again underneath so you can now absorb the bead above, so it's a nice flat wash. And my mantra in general when I teach any workshop is, you're not going to be perfect at first. If you mess something up, no big deal. You have extra paper. And just remember that if something happens, just do it again, do it better. If you mess it up again, do it again, do it better. If you mess it up again, do it again, do it better. You get the point. You have a whole journal to practice. Don't be scared to mess anything up. This is all technique. This is all just getting used to the feeling of doing it and taking away that intimidation of the tools. So some things you might be experiencing. You maybe are thinking, this is really dry. My paper, I can't make a nice flat wash because it's not wet enough, that means you need more water. If you are having a flat wash issue where the water is puddling or noticing some, I call them striations, but if you're noticing like a fanning out effect, that means you have too much water. Maybe pull it back a little bit. Right now, though, you should have a pretty even wash and be able to get that with your bigger brush. You can fix mistakes. We'll get there, but I want to show you first all these techniques. All right, the next one I want to show you is a gradient. And another way, really in real-time use, gradients, we're not going to use a gradient in this painting as much as we are going to be doing something called pulling. So when you're pulling, that means you're applying the ink, or you're applying the pigment. I'll put gradient here so you get the idea. You're applying pigment and you are pulling the pigment out with water only. This is what's going to give you a really interesting organic textured effect when you're painting. So what that looks like for pulling is, let me make sure you can see this here. Okay. Dip your brush in your water. And remember, I'll demo and then give you time to do it. Then pick up your color. And I'm picking up my Venetian red here. Picking up my Venetian red, I have water, Venetian red, and now I'm going to swipe. But here's the catch. After I make that first swipe, I'm going to dip my brush in my water, drag off any excess water, and pull the existing ink out. Water again, drag, pull it out. Water again, drag, pull it out. Water again, drag, pull it out. And you can keep doing that until you really get an interesting gradient. Now, to put that into real time, like why would we need to use that? It's something like a cloud. So imagine if I took just like a really light gray and I made the bottom line of a cloud. Let me show you here. So here, let's say this is my ink at the bottom of a cloud. Doesn't look like much, but as soon as I start pulling out the color, now I can get an interesting gradient. Dip, drag, pull, dip, drag, pull. And now I have a really soft looking shape. And this one happens to be a cloud. But if you look up close, you can see it's a little bit more organic. It's not just a straight fill in the whole cloud one color. I've applied the pigment and I've pulled the rest of it out with water to give it more texture. So go ahead and give the pulling or your gradient a try. Again, that was get the water on your brush, get the paint on your brush, swipe, then dip, drag, swipe, dip, drag, swipe until you get that gradient really pulling all the way down. Some troubleshooting for this. If you find that your color is just going everywhere and you can't control where it stays in that stroke, that means you have too much water. Maybe do an extra little drag as you come out your, the brush comes out of the water to make sure you don't have too much water. And I'm going to amend that because looking at my Rotunda sky, it's a different way in which we do it, but it's kind of like a gradient. You're going to have a really concentrated cerulean toward the bottom of your painting, and then we're going to pull it up with water. As you notice that kind of cloud effect at the top, all I did was just add more water at the top. I didn't color the entire thing in cerulean. Oh, I see some wine. That helps with watercolor. Heck yeah. Sorry, not spying on you gals. I have everybody up. I have like a wine radar. You might hear my dog in the background. Can't control her.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
So when I do my the gradient, what I end up with is it kind of pulls, like I pull it across to the right, and then I get a little pool of darker color at the right. So maybe that's too much water.
Oh yeah, that's okay. Yeah, you might have a little bit too much water, but watch what you can do to troubleshoot this. And this is good for any step of this process. Let's say I pulled my color, and then you dip, drag, and maybe over here, you're saying you're getting a lot of color on one side.
Yes.
That's fine. Oops, sorry. I would say first try less water. Second, you can always have a little paper towel on hand to just pick up any little spot that you're not into, but it has to happen pretty immediately. And then take a little bit of water and you can smooth stuff like that out. It might not be a perfect pull. It might not in the end look perfect, but at least you'll get rid of that darker spot if you didn't like it there. So I always have a little bit of paper towel on hand to just sop something up really quick if I need to. But in general, less water. But good question.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So even when I'm still getting pretty defined lines. Does that mean I'm not pulling them properly, or?
It means you probably don't have enough water on that first stroke.
Okay.
I would say that first stroke is the most important. So make sure you have a lot of water and a lot of color when you have that first pull. And then from there, you can release a little bit of that water, no color, and you'll be able to control it a little bit more. Good question.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So you're using paints that are clearly already moistened with water. Ours are all pretty.
No.
Should we have dropped some water in all of them?
No, this actually is the exact same palette you have. What I'm doing really is wetting this brush and I am pushing in there. I am really letting the moisture settle in. You don't have to do that to begin because it's just going to dry as you go. But as you go and use different paints, make sure that first swipe through has enough water to really get it going. And then you'll create these little puddles that I have.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
How frequently should we change the water?
I say between, it can still look cloudy and you might pick up a little color, especially if you're trying to go for a yellow. I usually switch mine. Well, today we will be switching between practice and the real deal. And then in any other time, I just say, once you start bringing in colors and you start noticing that it is not the pure color, it's time to change then. Great question though. But for now, for practice, I say stick with this guy. Yeah, of course. And you should be good throughout the painting too, depending on, because we don't have a really vibrant blue or anything. Those really muck things up as the blue. All right, I'm going to move on to the next strategy in about 20 seconds. So wrap up your pulling. I know it's so fun to play. So for this next strategy, it's called wet on wet. And I'm just going to dive right into something you might be doing today. I'm going to draw it so you can see what I'm talking about, but you don't have to draw anything out. I just want to give you the idea of what we might be doing. Probably hard to see, but there's a little bush. I'm making a little tree. And to do something wet on wet, there are two different ways you can do this. And you might get a completely different look depending on which one you go with. But basically, wet on wet is when you're applying color to a wet page. Two ways you can do that. First way, where did I put my brush? First way is to wet the space first. So on the right, I'm wetting my tree on the inside. And now I'm going to bring the color in. And this is my favorite thing to do, because if you have enough water, when I place this color right in here, it's going to spread. This is my favorite part of watercolor in all the world, guys. I watch videos to put myself to sleep of this stuff. It's great. But what's great is that now when I place that color in there, it's kind of doing all the work for me. I'm not painting any strokes. I'm now letting that color live in this space. So now it kind of has an organic little blob look to it. You can define it a little bit. But let's say now, while it's wet, I can go in with my even darker color. Wet on wet means that everything's so wet. let's say I take that Pearling green. So this was the Green Appetite Genuine, cleaned my brush, and now I'm coming in with Pearling green. And now I'm just adding some darkness. And right away, without having to do anything, that wet on wet gave me an organic, variegated texture without having to do much work. That wet on wet really gives you a good technique, and it's pleasing to the eye without you having to think too much. So that's why I really like wet on wet. I wet the paper, then I brought in my moisture and my pigment. And while it was still wet, I brought in another darker color to control where those dark spots lie. So again, and you actually don't even have to wet it first if you don't want. If you want to do this tree again, I could fill it in. I'm just placing color in here. This is a dry tree. But to get that wet on wet texture now, I would fill in the tree here. I'm leaving little white space because it gives the idea that there's light. And then now here's the wet on wet part. So if you forget to wet the paper first, don't worry. But here's another example of the wet on wet. Same idea, pretty much same thing, except I forgot to wet the paper. Shoot, no big deal. You can still get that organic texture by adding the color quickly. Now, if you add that second color and it just goes everywhere and it overtakes your lighter green, that's what that paper towel is for. Get in there, pick it up. So then you can go in and repurpose your green so it stays light over there. Now let's say you don't want to do a tree. Perhaps you want to just do a splotch. Those are equally wonderful. Wet your paper and then apply your color. I'm going to go with some nickel Azo Yellow. This one spreads really well. So if you want to do a wet on wet splotch, starting with the yellow you have, it moves so fast. It's so fun. So I have some nickel Azo Yellow. Then let me go a shade darker because remember we always start light. Now I'll go to the Aussie Red Gold, place some of that in there. This is just a blob. This is not a shape. And then let me go to the Pyrrole Red or your Pyrrole Scarlet. What do you have? You have Pyrrole. It's actually Pyrrole Red. I forgot the word red, but you get the point. And place the Pyrrole in there. Now what's great about wet on wet is I can pick up my paper and I can let these colors move around. But keep in mind that whatever is wet on the page, it's also going to move around. So I would say make sure it's contained to whatever you're working on. Once it's wet, it doesn't move. But what's cool is that it will not go outside of those wet bounds you've given it. So I could try to force it that way all day. It's not going to go there unless it's heavy enough, and then it'll drip, which I'll show you in a minute. But wet on wet is fun to play around with. So go ahead and give wet on wet a try for about a minute, and then I will show you the last few as a cluster, and then I'm going to give you time to play around before we get started. So take about a minute, try some wet on wet if you haven't already. Maybe even try to apply it to a tree, starting with a green Appetite and then putting in that Pyrrole green. Maybe you even want to go crazy and go darker and take in some of that Payne's Gray. Add that in at the end. Let's see, I can do that. And just generally, the more concentrated you want your color, that means you want more pigment, less water. So if you might just have a really delicate touch though. You might notice that your stuff is not as opaque and concentrated. That's fine. You might prefer a lighter hand. I do not have a light hand. So you'll notice a lot of darks and pretty opaque looking paints. Yes. Okay. I'm telling you, if you want to wow your social media presence, do some of these close-up videos of wet on wet technique. Make sure you have accurate lighting or some good lighting, and you'll hook them. Also, while I'm remembering to tell you, while you're doing your wet on wet, remember that all of this is replaceable. Let's say we get started on our final painting. I guarantee I could help you fix any mistakes, but But if for some reason you mess something up and you do not like it and we cannot fix it, I can always send you an outline again. We would just, it'd be a couple bucks for shipping. That would be super easy. That's something you can do, email me a couple days later after you look at it. If you're like, oh, I really want another one. I get it. I've been there. You can just let me know. So I really want you to take all pressure off of this 2 hours. You don't have to make it perfect the first time. I hope you love wet on wet as much as I do. But let me take another 20 seconds and I'm going to set you up for the next 3 strategies: dry brushing, drips, and splatter. Those I do not use as much, but they're good to know and they're pretty fun. Maybe you'll tend toward the abstract. I think you'll like it. But dry brushing, if you look at your rotunda, I dry brushed part of the grass, basically this whole bottom part. I laid down a dark layer, or excuse me, I laid down a light layer, and then to just give it texture, I dry brushed a lot of that left side, especially some of this right side up here too. I probably dry brushed a little bit inside the trees. It just gives things a little bit more of a texture. So if you have bricks, we won't dry brush our bricks. We want them to be pretty approximate, but or pretty detailed, I guess. But dry brushing is great for concrete, for bricks, for stonework, anything you want to give a little bit of texture to. So I'm going to wet my brush. I need to have a wet brush to pick up the color. So you always start with a wet brush to pick that color up, and look how much color I'm picking up. So I'm still in here to make that little wet puddle. Now I'm just going to dry it on my paper towel here. And then I'm going to come in and I use the side of my brush, and you'll notice it's going to catch on the fibers of your paper. That's all it is, dry brushing. Wet your brush, and I'm going to show you all of these at once so you can follow along, and I'll give you a few minutes to do it after, or you can do it as I chat, no big deal. To do that, again, dry brushing, wet your brush, get into your color, whatever color you're using, tap it on your paper towel to get any excess moisture. Use the side of your brush to leave white space naturally. And this is actually really helpful for an ocean. If you ever do work with water, if you were to, let's say I go, yeah, it's hard to tell here, but if I were to dry brush over something like this splotch here, if I dry brush over, it's hard to see because of the color, but what I can do is it gives the illusion of light. If I just dry brush really lightly over any kind of splotch, you can then give the texture of water. I know that's not a great example, but people usually don't use dry brushing a whole lot. Another example of this next one is a drip. A drip is when, if you think of it like a cloud, you have a splotch with a whole lot of moisture, can't hold it anymore. And to drip, once you drip, you cannot undrip, but it just means you have a lot of water. And what you do is just tap the side onto a paper towel and you get your drip. You can kind of close it off here at the end so it doesn't keep dripping off. But once you drip, you can't undrip, but they are fun for abstract. The third, I would recommend you don't do it today if you're wearing something nice. You will inevitably drip on yourself or splatter. But when you want to do a splatter, you wet your brush, pick up the color, hold it in your non-dominant hand, and then flick. I will always get this on myself. And the direction in which you're actually flicking it will dictate the direction the paint goes. So you notice when I flicked that way, I got flick marks that way. You can tap down and get more concentrated little splatters. Those are fun. But like I said, be careful on your table. No matter how hard you try to control it, you cannot. So go ahead and take about a minute to try dry brushing, drips, and a splatter if you want to. Your palette, your water's probably getting murky now. Not a big deal. If you are close to water and you wanted to change it out, great. We still have a little bit more practice to do. So let's say this, it's 5:43. I want to give you until 5:50. So that's 7 minutes to do a couple different things. Try out those last strategies, dry brush, drip, splatter. We'll talk about wet on dry later. Don't worry about that. Then I would say take another piece of your scrap paper and just test out all those colors. Make sure you know what each one looks like. My favorite thing to do personally is to make circles. So for 7 minutes or so, I want you to finish out those strategies and then play around. Make some circles. You can do the pulling method with the circle. You could also just color it in completely. Maybe add some water to it, see what happens. Just play around for about 7 minutes, and then let's meet back here at 5:50 with clean water, ready to go on the next step. And as always, yell at any questions if you have them. Something else I want to mention, if you were interested, is mixing etiquette. I've constructed this today where you don't need to mix any colors if you don't want to, but let's say you do want to mix some colors. Imagine this is the top of your palette and it's round. Mine, I just don't have any extras lying around right now. If you wanted to mix any colors, even now as you're playing around just to see what it looks like, the same idea applies. You're going to get that water. You're going to pick up whatever color you want to mix together, pick up that first color and just place it into your mixing palette. Wash off your water, maybe even put a little bit more water in there. Wash off your brush and then go in for the next color. So let's say I want to do Venetian red and some magenta. I don't think you guys have magenta, but I pick up as much of that magenta as I can get and then place it in that well as well. And I almost always keep a little piece of scrap paper nearby when I'm painting. So then when I mix together, I can see, okay, is that the right tone? Is that the color I was going for? Ooh, no, I want a little bit more magenta. And you can come back through in here, add it to your little well, try it again, and wait till you get the swatch you need. But like I said, you don't have to do any mixing today. I have constructed this so we're really controlling the colors with water. If you want something lighter, you add more water. If you want something darker, you add less water and make it really concentrated. But we can definitely, I will walk you through all that. But with this playtime, if you wanted to mix a few colors for a few minutes and see what that looks like, we could do that too. Another thing, try not to leave your brushes in the water. It's okay during this class, but once you leave the class, make sure you just swish them in the water, wipe them with your paper towel, and then store them so they're bristle side up. But for now, if you want to rest in the water, that's fine. Just something to note. If you're still doing circles, don't worry, you have a few more minutes. I'm just getting set up here. How's everyone doing with playtime? Getting a little more comfortable, getting a feel for your brushes, I hope. Taking a peek at your colors. So on your palette, if you did have the little X's, I think there were maybe a slew of 5 or 6 where I swapped the green and the red very apparently, or maybe the brown and the red. So if you have 2 X's, that just means flip-flop them. If you have more than a couple X's, it means I would have elaborated if they were colors you couldn't tell the difference between, but it's probably like the red and the yellow, something very apparent. But please ask questions if you're not sure. All right, so right about now, you should probably change out your water, make sure you have a fresh batch of water. If you want a fresh paper towel, replenish your snacks or beverages, and then we'll get into the good stuff. What I'm going to do while we're working is I'm going to set up a little plan of attack so that if you do get kind of behind, which I don't think you will, but I really encourage you to work at your own pace and not get stressed out if for some reason you fall behind or you just want to sit back and relax for a few minutes. That's understandable. So what I'll do is set up a plan of action here. As I go through the steps on the left, I'll then, while you're working, I'll write them down on the right. And I can even scan this in and send it to you in that recap email. Because like I was saying about watercolor, there is a flow to it. It doesn't matter what you do when, but it does in terms of the dryness and the moisture. If I go to do the sky and I immediately go to do one of these trees up here, the sky and the trees are going to bleed together. So you do have to strategize when you do different parts of your landscape at different times. But like I said, I'm going to walk you through that, and then I'll write general outlines here on the right as we go. I'll give everyone another minute just to get situated. So to give you an idea, while we're giving everyone time to hop in here, your cerulean is your blue. That's all I gave you. There are no other options. But the cerulean's a really beautiful light color. It's more transparent because I want the rotunda to stand out. So we're going to concentrate as much of the cerulean as we can down here towards the bottom and wash it up with more water as we move up. But it's not going to be super dark. So just be prepared. The cerulean is a lighter transparency in terms of actual pigment. And then we're going to move quickly to probably, I would say, because the sky touches all of this, I'm probably going to work next down here in the landscaping. Since most of this landscape is not touching the sky, we're going to give that sky time to breathe while we come down here, do the landscape, and then come back up to the top and fill in some of these trees. Okay, so we are going to ping pong around a little bit, but I'm going to go slow but just understand things might look different if by the time we get to the next step, your paint might be dry. Not a big deal. It's still going to work perfectly fine, but I will give you those cues. Anyone not ready yet? Okay, here we go. All right, so we're going to start with this sky area up here. And there's one thing I want you to note, that cerulean, you're going to make sure you get in between those two pillars on the left, because the angle of the rotunda, you can see that this pillar here, that's sky to the right of it. So just that little in between, don't forget that when you're doing your cerulean. What's going to help you if you wanted to, I might do a wet on wet and wet my whole sky first, because this is going to give it room to move. And now I have a little red tint to my water. I'm just going to add more water. And what I'm going to do, this paper is so resilient, you guys. Don't be nervous about doing this. I'm going to get in here and just generally give some moisture to my paper all around here. I want to see the water, but I don't want it to be puddling or dripping anywhere. Just placing a little bit of water down first. I think you can kind of see it on the camera here. Placing it down just so now when I place the blue in here, it'll have somewhere to live. It does not have to be perfect. It'll start to dry around those little corners, and you can always pick things up with that paper towel. Something else you want to have handy on you are a little snippet of paper towel, your color wheel, and a little piece of scrap paper if you have it. Maybe your practice paper is nearby. So now that my sky is wet where I want it to be wet, just generally, I'm going to wet my brush again and really dig into the cerulean, because like I said, the cerulean is not a very dark blue. It's a really light, eloquent blue. And so I'm wetting it, and I don't know if you can see here on the camera, I'm really getting in here and making myself a little puddle so that I have a lot on my brush. So now when I go to place it back into this picture, I don't have to do much work. I'm going to place the blue in there, let it run around a little bit. And this takes away the stigma of having to make brush strokes. You don't have to do that. You'll get a nice organic looking sky. There are little details, but notice the tip of your brush has that little tiny tip that will not, it won't make a larger brush stroke if you just lightly apply it around these little lines. Just work your way around the whole rotunda, and don't forget that little space of blue in here. If you want to get your smaller brush to get into this little space, absolutely. If you want to turn your paper completely upside down, do that too. Does not matter which way the paper goes, whatever's comfortable. And so now I'm going to work the blue around and keep applying more pigment if you need to, working it around the rotunda. And if it really bothers you, if you get into that rotunda top and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't live knowing that this is a little bit of blue, take that paper towel, pick it up as soon as it happens, go right back over it, and it should cover up well. And so now I've placed the blue all around the rotunda. And now we're going to work it up the whole page using water and more cerulean. If you wet your paper beforehand, this should be pretty easy. Take that cerulean and just place it in there. Take a little bit, you can have more water. This is really resilient paper, you guys. Take a little more water. It might bend and bow a little bit, but it's not going to hurt your painting at all. As soon as it dries, it'll flatten out. This is really, really good paper. I don't think I mentioned this is Arches. This is Arches cold press paper. Your journal is Strathmore. So notice how up here, I'm just lightly going back and forth. If I notice that I have too much of a line, I might bring in more water and just soften out those edges and pull the ink. But I did leave a significant amount of white at the top, just to leave the idea of potential clouds. But just get into all those corners. It doesn't have to be perfect, or especially around these trees. Just go right up to the edge of it. Even if you color on top of where you might see little ink marks, not a big deal. Those ink marks are going to be light enough that you can really manipulate your tree wherever you want it. So now I look at my paper and I'm thinking, all right, this isn't bad. I don't want these straight lines across. I actually want them to be more diagonal. So I'm going to go and take my cerulean and just make a few striations here this way. A few brush strokes. Bring them all the way out to the edge if you want. And then you can always place water, will give it a good effect. Now, when it starts to bow a lot, that means you need to step away. So at this point, I'm going to step away. This is my sky. It is what it is. Just take a few minutes to do your sky if you haven't already. And what we did, that plan of attack. We wet sky, we applied the blue. And then we pulled blue up with water. Hope my shorthand makes sense. But this is true for any landscape. I usually work from top to bottom as much as possible, because you don't ever want to reach up to the top of the page when something is still wet, where your wrist could be. Another reason I love this paper, I did a little test early on when I was testing out papers. It actually makes your color brighter. So this paper retains a lot more of that vibrant color better than other papers. So you might do this exact same thing in your Strathmore workbook, which is just as great. It's good paper, but the arches is just made so well and will just be a tiny bit brighter. And we're going to take it slow at the beginning. I want to let everyone catch up so that we can get to the greenery next and we're all on the same page. Also, something, oh, go ahead. Someone have a question?
I was gonna say, I just have to say that as someone who has grown up always like having the color within the lines, I am mad stressed right now. I feel like my heart rate as I get to the rotunda is like going up because I don't want to go over it. And I'm like, this is a stress relieving activity. Like, calm down.
It's,
and I'm like,
yep.
I went over the lines.
You are not alone. That's why you have this little paper towel. Just pick it up or use your smaller brush. But also remember, you are this close to your work, Victoria. Pull it away from your face. Seriously, put it on a shelf every once in a while, step away from it, and you're going to see that you really can't see any of those things.
That's a good point.
Oh, gosh, yeah. So
thank you.
Let that perfectionist in you maybe stop talking. But I know. Let me show you here on the rotunda, on my original, I have some blue in there too. You really, really cannot tell. So go easy on yourself. Even I did it. And these are things that just kind of all blend together as you go. And if all else fails, I'll send you another one.
No. Thank you for the mini pep talk. I needed it.
Listen, you're not alone.
It's gonna be okay.
It happens every single class. And something else I was going to tell you, if it bothers you that this is bowing so much, at some point, something else I do often, you can tape it down to a piece of cardboard. I don't particularly do that because I think it limits your space and I like to turn my paper a lot, but you could just take some painter's tape or masking tape make sure it's pretty easy to peel off. Do a test on your paper first and just tape the edges so that it'll stay flat. But for today, I think we should be okay with a little bit of bowing. Taping is a whole other process. All right, about 2 minutes, I'm going to start working on our greenery, or showing you how to attack the greenery. All right, so if I'm looking at my rotunda here, it's hard to see because of the way this printed, probably for you too. There's a little tiny bush down here, just a little vague greenery. I don't even see that on my actual painting, but you could do 2 ways. You can make this one full lawn. That would be perfectly fine. That would just mean you painted this whole bottom the same way. Or if you wanted to give it a little bit of interesting pieces, a little bit of a challenge, you could take this out and make that little half circle here. And what that would look like is taking, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at the 6th bush, bringing it out and down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, bringing it out around that little tiny bush that you might see on your paper and back down. I'll make that line a little darker so you can see it. Actually, let me just do it in pen. So I forgot to tell you, I inked all of these. Yes, I printed yours. I did not hand ink each one. That would take forever. But I use these micron pens because they are permanent ink. It's just my style. I really like to have a line or an area to color it in, and I can erase those pencil marks. But if you only have a pencil, don't worry. Again, you do not need to make this little half circle, but if you do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at the 6th bush, bring it down and around to the corner of the page. All right. So to keep things simple, I only have 2 greens. I gave you 2 greens and that is it. You can mix other colors with those greens, but you can do everything I'm doing just with your Green Apatite Genuine and your Perylene Green. And I would say your Payne's Gray would go really well with that if you wanted to deepen and darken the contrast. Here's how we're going to attack this. I'm going to start with this chunk down here, and I'm going to put in some Green Apatite Genuine. And then I'm going to layer in some Perylene Green, because as we're thinking about this whole picture, and I know it's a lot, but I'm going to walk you through it. We're thinking about it as if the light is coming from the top left corner and showing this way. So you notice that there's darker points here in the rotunda where the light is not hitting, underneath the awning where the light isn't hitting, and then down here to the bottom right where the light is not hitting on your landscape as well. I'll walk you through all that, don't worry. But just something to keep in mind as we go. That's why I'm doing these certain things. So my Green Apatite Genuine, you can mix this. You don't have to go right from the palette. You can mix it in the top of your, whatchamacallit, palette top, my goodness. But for me, I can just pull that Green Apatite Genuine, like you water your brush, pick up the color, and now just place it in here. If it's really dark, totally fine. Start up here by the bushes. I'm using the side of my brush and I'm getting the little tip up into those little bushes toward the top. And now I'm going to pull. Here's where I take my water and I just pull the rest of this pigment towards the bottom. And so I'm not getting, if you get a little stroke mark, totally fine. Just get in there, get more water. I'm going to color right over that weird little bush. Something else, I don't color to my edges for whatever reason. My brain likes to leave a little white space, so I'm going to do that. Doesn't have to be perfect, but if you want to go all the way out to the edges, great. Now you notice I started to get really light on my green, so I just picked up some more color. There's some more Green Apatite Genuine. So you're basically coloring in this section, but do it by pulling because that will give you variation even if you're coloring it in. So that's step one. Fill that little half circle, or if you're doing the whole thing, just do the whole thing on the bottom the same way. And even looking at it, when you do the pulling method, it has organic texture and you didn't have to do much. You just colored it in, but by pulling out the pigment in different scenarios. And now once I have that section, I'm going to go in with Perylene Green pretty quickly. Notice that it's not dry yet, and that's good because I want to do this wet on wet. And watch what I do. If you just take a real quick breather to watch, I'm going to take that Perylene Green and just line it up along the bottom portion of that weird little half circle space. And I'm just placing the color there. So now it looks like I have a darker contrast. While it's still wet, I did that. And lastly, if you want to smooth it out with a little water, you can, but no pressure. So try that first. Green Apatite Genuine. While it's still wet, trim the edges with a little Perylene Green. Smooth it out with your water if you want. And I know it feels like it goes fast. It really does. Once you wet an area and you want to keep playing with it, you need to move quickly on those darker colors. So that's why we're doing this in chunks. So Green Apatite Genuine, or if you're doing the whole bottom, remember, just do this whole bottom Green Apatite Genuine. You don't have to make the little half circle I made. And if you wanted to add those darker, we're going to add darker under the bushes too, but we'll get there. That Perylene Green is really here for your contrast. That's going to be how you're going to get those dark spots. And I might even, I'm looking down here, I might even darken it up a little bit more while it's still wet. Place some Perylene Green, even more down there, and it'll just bleed up into the wet space. The last thing I want you to do in this little section is to take Perylene Green and now darken up beneath those bushes just a little bit. So that gives the illusion that the light is now covering that little space where the bushes are shading them, if that makes sense, shading the grass here. So one more time, recap. Green Apatite Genuine, the whole area by pulling. Perylene Green on the edge to give the illusion that it's hidden from the sun, and then Perylene Green under those bushes to give you illusion of shade. Don't stress, take a few minutes, we're going slow. It doesn't have to be perfect either. Let the watercolor do interesting things. It's not going to look perfect, but that's what's great about watercolor. And if you're not convinced, like I said, hold it away from your face 5 feet or more and take a look at it from afar. And you're going to see that your eye naturally fills in those gaps between the contrast and your, what you think are mistakes, but that no one sees those. And this is the pattern we're going to take for every shrub in this picture. We're going to lay the base color down. We're going to add some contrast. We're going to add more contrast when it's dry. You'll see that next. But that's how you're going to do each little patch of green in this picture. The trees have a little bit of a more special touch to them that I'll show you. All right, let's say 2 more minutes to do that little patch of green. The next patch we're going to go to is this little stripe to the right of those little bushes, the line of bushes. Deep breaths, everyone. In your nose, out your mouth. So the same idea, exact same way we just did that little patch. I'm going to show you how to do this next patch. Take my green apatite genuine and take it through this little swatch of land here underneath that tree. I would take it here and then pull it out with some water. Same idea. Let that watercolor do its job. I would work around these little branches. In the picture, I think I continued the green here and in a little corner there. And then work around these little bushes. Coloring it in, essentially coloring the lines here. And while it's still wet, now I'm going to determine where these points of darkness are. So the points of darkness are going to be underneath this line of bushes at the top, and then also towards the bottom. So I'm going to take that Perylene green again and just drag it along the top here. Just with the tip of my brush. I am barely pressing down. If you press down a lot and you got a lot of darkness, don't worry. But look how it's really imperfect. It's all scattered. It's everywhere. That is going to give it a good look. And then also Perylene at the bottom. So towards the top line at this bottom line. Smooth it out with a little bit of water if you need to, but I like having those different shades. I want to see the darkness and the light.
Oh, I did the wrong one.
And remember, if you make a mistake different than what I did, and don't panic, you can just show me or explain to me what happened and I can help you remedy it. And even if you don't do it right away, I'm sure we can find a way to fix it. And I'm also sure it doesn't look that bad. I could also, like, if you look at this, I could get hung up about this weird little spot here, but I like it. It gives, I don't have a very even dark contrast there. It's a little variegated and that's good. I'm going to let that be and not try to make it perfect. I really do love Bob Ross. I say happy accidents all the time because truly you'll do something and you didn't mean to, and you'll step back and say, wow, that actually really works. Great. If you're ready and you want to, you can move on to the next section and do the exact same thing. Keeping in mind, if either of these spaces are still wet, they're going to bleed together with whatever you do, which is fine because it's all greenery. You can go in and touch it up later. But if you want to avoid any kind of bleeding, I would just say get right up on that line, but don't touch it. And if you're better off waiting and you know you're better off waiting, you could do that too. But here I go again with the green apatite genuine. This one's a really good spreader too. And then water to pull that ink where I want it to go, so that it has a nice variety of texture and mid-tones and dark tones. So a light tone is one with a lot of water. A mid-tone is pretty much right out of the palette with a little bit of water. And your dark tone is when you really dig in to get a lot of pigment. So filling with Green Apatite Genuine. Taking it to the bottom of the page. Here's where you can dry brush too. If you want to leave some of the white of the paper and dry brush a little bit, you can do that. And I'm just getting right up on the edge of this space we just painted. If you touch it, it might bleed a little bit. Just sop it up with your paper towel or leave it. It might look good. And then of course, while this is still wet, take in my Perylene Green and place it under the bushes, because this is where there is a shadow. Also down here, this is a little bit of a shadow. I would actually take this Perylene all the way through. And then smooth it out with water if you want, but I would leave that as is for now. If you really wanted to give it some variation, you could pull it out here. It's wet on wet, so it's just gonna kind of blend into that existing Green Apatite. If you wanna give it a little texture, you can pull it out into that Green Apatite. The only thing, the key, I think, is to leave this little space here light, because there's nothing really blocking the light there, if that makes sense. And once you do those 3 sections, hold it away from your face. Really take a look at it. And you're going to see that contrast, it pops, that little bit of green. The differences will really make it stand out.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
So the space that you said to leave light, I actually have kind of dark. So
Oh, good.
to lighten it up, do I just add more water and kind of try and spread it in the other direction?
Ooh, good question. So here is how you can do that. As long as it's still wet, let's say you darkened up here a little bit too much, no big deal. You're going to wet the paper and then you're going to pick it up with your paper towel.
Okay.
And look at that. There it goes.
Okay.
You're back to light. Yep. And just take a tiny bit of color and a tiny bit of water and smooth out what you want to smooth out.
Okay.
Yeah, great question. And then I might even go back in and put a little bit dark back under those bushes to reinstate that contrast. If anyone wants to show us what you got already, I'm sure it looks amazing. All that green contrast goodness. Be proud of yourself. This better hang on your fridge for at least a day. Oh, look at that. Chris, excellent. I see the light and dark. Very good. Nice. Oh, perfect. Yeah, you got that, Jan. You did the whole bottom. That's perfectly fine. You did it really well. Awesome. Nice. Oh, Kevin, I see all that contrast. Joanne, contrast. I don't think I have you all on the same screen. So let's see here. Yay. Nice job, Jenna. Anne-Marie, it looks good. Heck yeah, you guys. This looks really, you should be super proud. If you haven't done watercolor in a while, this is really a feat. And if you haven't figured that out already, it's a lot, but it's doable and you guys are doing awesome. So let's take another minute to finish up those green spaces. And then I'm going to show you one more thing we're going to do to them before we leave them to be. So I am a contrast junkie. I am not finished with my painting until it has dark dark spots. Sometimes I do them all at the same time at the very end, but since we're working piece by piece here, I'm going to show you how I would start to do that while things might be a little wet still. So for this, I'm actually going to switch my brushes. I'm going to go in with my small brush. I'm going to pick up some Payne's Gray. Notice you don't have any black on your palette. If you add Payne's Gray to any other color, you'll get a darker shade of that color. I would say don't mix it with the yellow because you'll get some weird short of green. It does tint on the blue side. So I've picked up a bunch of Payne's Gray with my little brush. And now I'm just going to accentuate those points of contrast a little bit more. And what that looks like is following the line of the bushes up here with that Payne's Gray, picking up more if you need to, because I want it to be dark. And notice I'm not making a straight line. I'm just kind of like dotting my brush along the bottom edge of all these little bushes. And then I'm going to continue the Payne's Gray to the bottom portion here. Just a line. And if you don't like the line, if you're thinking, oh, that looks too fake, that's fine. You can pull it out with some water. Just take a little water and pull that existing pigment out. So you're putting the Payne's Gray underneath that whole line of bushes. And then also along this line. If you don't like that line look, pull it out with a little bit of water. Third place I want to add Payne's Gray, I guess fourth, is underneath this line of bushes, which we will get to later. So to really deepen that contrast, I just added Payne's Gray under the bushes, these little guys, on the bottom part of this half circle, over here in the landscape division after the bushes, and then underneath the row towards the top. I'm going to show you how to do all of the trees in the same way and then give you about 10 minutes to work on those. And then we're going to get into the rotunda so that we have time. Let's say if you're missing some shrubs later, you could always do the shrubs in the same way we just talked about. Place the light color down, place the dark where the dark might be, and then add even more dark once it's a little bit more dry. Did you notice how that Payne's Gray didn't go anywhere really? It's because those sections were a little bit more dry. So that's another dance of watercolors, figuring out when to place things at what time. So to do trees, you are going to bring in a little bit of yellow first. And if your water is a little murky, even when you bring in the yellow, it's fine because you're going to go over that with green anyway. So don't stress if your yellow looks a little greenish. That's actually what you want. So I'm going to take some water. I'm going to take, now this Azo Yellow is very pungent. So I would just take a little tiny bit and then pull it out. So let me show you where you're going to place the Azo Yellow. I'm going to put, so remember the light is coming from here. So I want to make sure that this side, I'm going to put little dabs of yellow here, clean my brush out, pull out that yellow. And I would even say this is really way too bright. That is so weird and fake. I'm going to take my little paper towel and just dab some of that off, just so you have a little bits of yellow where the sun might be highlighting those trees. So Azo Yellow along the left edge of this left edge of the right tree. And I would put a little bit of Azo Yellow on the right side of this tree, because if you think about it, this tree is close to us and it does not see the light right there, but it might get a little bits of light on the right side here. So it can go out into the sky a little bit as long as your sky is dry. Pull out with water and then dab it to give it more of a realistic look. You can have some bright yellow, that's perfectly fine. Remember, you're going to go over it with the green. And bear with me, couple more spots of yellow to the left of these little shrubs here. Maybe a little on the edge there. I don't even know if I did this on the original, but this is only going to enhance the layers of your painting. So pulling out with a lot of water, then taking that paper towel and just sopping it up. It might seem pointless, but it's going to just give it a really nice layered look. So again, we have yellow on the right tree on the left side, the left tree on the right side, and these shrubs where the light might be hitting, coming from that left side. Because all the while we're keeping in mind that this is where the light's coming from. I'm going to show you how to do one tree. And then for the sake of time, we're going to move on to the rotunda after you do that one tree so that you know how to do all these other little bushes and trees with the same kind of effect that I'm going to show you. So if I were to do every piece of greenery with the Perylene green and green apatite, that'd be fine, totally fine. But I wouldn't really have a variation of color. If you want to, you can mix some colors together with your green. If you're going to mix, I would say trying little bits of cerulean in with the green apatite or little bits of nickel azo yellow in with the green apatite. I would not do the blue and the yellow and the green. You could actually. You could play with these three colors. Green apatite, nickel azo, and the cerulean in different quantities might give you a little bit of the bluish, kind of more bluish shrubs I have here, instead of the same green the whole way around. So it's something to think about. You don't have to though, but the way we're generally going to work these trees is bring in that light color right over the yellow. Then while it's still wet, we're going to bring in that darker Perylene green. And then once it dries a little bit, we'll bring in Payne's gray, even darker. So let's do this one. I'm going to take some green apatite genuine and I'm going to mix it with a little cerulean. Why not? I know you can't see that part of my palette, but let me show you. So I'm taking my cerulean, and don't worry about getting colors if you accidentally get a little green in these. Once these dry, take a clean brush with clean water and just give it a swipe, wipe it off, you'll be good to go. But I'm putting in a little cerulean here with my green, just mixing it right here. And now I'm going to come back, add a little water because I want this to go a long way. And you're not really with the trees. I want you to think about more a strategy called pointillism, where you are dotting. You're making little dots with your brush tip, and they don't all have to be the same. So what that looks like, I'm going to color dot the whole tree, this whole section here, and out into the yellow, right over that yellow. So you might think, well, what was the point of the yellow in the first place? It's there because you can see it underneath and it gives that layered effect. And notice I'm just pressing down on my brush. I'm really not thinking too hard about how big the dots are, what the shapes are. Go in and give it that kind of pointillism look with enough water to fill that whole space. And I challenge you to go over the blue a little bit. Bring it out over the cerulean of the sky so that it looks like these little droplets are kind of hanging off the end of the tree. And then the rest of this is just blot, 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 blot. Very technical term here, guys. Blot, zhuzh, dab. Yeah. Make a happy little tree. Have it hanging over a little bit on that blue. Maybe a little rogue branch or two. So if it looks like a perfect semicircle, you might want to bring out a branch or two. And keep doing that, fill the whole space. And I'm going to bring in some Perylene green when I'm ready. You don't have to do that right away, don't rush or anything, but you know the drill now. We're going to bring in the darkness towards the corner of the page, because this is what's hidden almost completely from the light. And notice on your exemplar here, I just kind of am making this whole part really dark and bringing it out to the right. And I'm going to leave a little bit of lightness on the outside. So dark, dark, dark. I can bring a little bit of darkness across. And I would say maybe just darken the bottom of each little bough you made, bottom of each little branch. So maybe dark on the bottom here, dark on the bottom, a little bit of dark, a little bit of dark, a little bit, just to bring it to those edges, but not all the way, because that's where we put some yellow, remember. As long as you can see some dark, some light, and a little bit of yellow, you just made yourself a happy tree. Not every space has to be filled in. I leave things white on purpose because your eye perceives that as light, or maybe looking through the tree. And now as it's drying a little bit, I'm going to go in and get some Payne's gray. You can actually add the Payne's gray to the Perylene green. It would make a darker shade of that, or you can go straight in with the Payne's gray. You don't need to mix both. I'm going to mix a little bit of Perylene and that Payne's gray to darken it up, and then go really dark to the inside here. And if I can't tell the difference, that means I might need to wait till it dries a little bit, but I'm going to add some dark, dark, dark in here to the left to really give it contrast. And just a little bit to the right, a little bit of darkness, so it's not completely even. So if you wanted to start working on more of your shrubs, I can almost guarantee we're not going to get to the rest today. So for the next probably 4 or 5 minutes, I'm going to paint up the rest of the shrubs in that same exact style I just showed you. So take about 4 or 5 minutes, work on some of your greenery the way we just did. And then at 6:40, we're going to start on that rotunda and probably need to change out our water at this point. And if you want to mute at any time, you can mute me, by the way. You don't have to listen to every single word I say, but I do like to dictate what I'm doing so that you can remember. I'm going to take for this right tree, green apatite genuine, maybe a little cerulean. Same way, just blotting the color on. I'm using my medium brush because I can cover more space that way. And it has more texture because it's bigger. Use the side of your brush if you want. It can overlap. These little ink marks I gave you are just general guidelines, but for the trees, absolutely make them overlap a little bit. That's perfectly fine. Does not and should not be perfect. Does not have to be perfect and should not be perfect. Turn your brush every once in a while so you don't have the same shape. Then, as before, taking that Perylene green and add some darkness to the right, because coming from the right side there, that's where we're getting most of the contrast. And we bring it out a little bit, just a little tiny bit at the ends. So it looks like there's some contrast between leaves at the ends. I'm going to wait on the Payne's gray because it'll just blend into what I have there. So I want it to stand out a little more. I'm going to wait a hot second. And I'm gonna come down here to this next bush. Remember, you're not racing through this. I'm just doing it so you can reference this later. You go slow, take your time with your bushes. You know the drill though. It's this pointillism thing. Get in and around these little sides, little corners. And the biggest thing when you do these bushes is to make sure that if they're separate little sections that they don't touch. So this is a separate bush from this one, and I'm making sure to add contrast, but I'm going to let this completely dry before I go in to do this guy. And again, if you want to add a little yellow to your Green Apatite Genuine, you can do that. You can add cerulean to your Green Apatite Genuine. You can even add Payne's Gray to your Green Apatite Genuine, and it'll give it more of a bluish, darker tint. I'll do these little trees next. So I'd say another minute, work on whatever you're working on, take a breather, go change out your water. And let's meet back up at 6:41 in about 2 minutes and get ready for our rotunda. I can let these blend together a little bit because later when it's drier, I can go in and make the darkness so they stand out from each other. How's everyone doing? Don't stress about this, the quickness of this part. You're gonna be able to hang out and do this all later because the shrubs, you have the method down. All right, I'm gonna lay off the landscape for a moment while I change out my water and start prepping for my rotunda. And look, I got a little bit of blue on my pillar. Don't worry about that. Later on, if you have whiteout even, or a gel pen, or let's see, I have this Molotow acrylic paint pen. Even if you have a chalk marker, you can go in and you can go back over this little spot here that shouldn't be blue. Take whatever white substance you can and just fudge it out. No one knows. And just take a minute and step away from your painting and take a look at it. Be super proud of your greenery thus far. All right, and just to verbally tell you what's going to be next on the docket, I'm going to be taking Venetian red and watering it down. So that means I probably have to mix a little bit on a separate palette or on the top of your palette. You're going to take some Venetian red. You're going to bring in a lot of water so that we are going to make a base coat, kind of like the trees. We're going to make a base color for this that's not too dark so that we can go in and make darker bricks later. So to do that, you might need to clean off your palette if you are running out of mixing space. So to do that, I'm going to pause on the greenery. So I'll probably just take my paper towel, wipe this up So I have now space to mix my Venetian red with some water. All right, here we go. I'm going to be using my small brush because I do not want to try to get in all those spaces with my big old brush. So here we have water. And here's how I would mix this. I'm actually going to put some water over here in the little spot. I already have some water ready to go. Pick up a little bit of Venetian red, put it in that water spot. So now it's already light and I can tell that it's going to be a good, and if I'm not sure, then take that swatch that color. That'll be a nice light base coat. So now when we get into the Rotunda, I'm just going to fill in. You're just going to color in. Basically, don't worry about any variegation. Don't worry about pulling right now. Just worry about getting in that base coat to all these little nooks and crannies. Leaving the space white that should be white. So I'll probably, to work from top to bottom, I'll start here. Make sure you have enough water on that brush to get into these little tiny spaces. Pick up more color and pick up more water as you go. And reference this picture when you're looking like, oh, is that white? Is that a white like trim, or is that the actual Rotunda? So there's nothing fancy here. This is almost like a flat wash. Just get the color down so we can add some cute little bricks later. And this is your Venetian red. Turn your paper if you need to. Remember, you want to be comfortable with your angles. There are little tiny holes, if you think about it, between these pillars. Don't even worry about those. If you want to get in there with your tiny brush, you can. You do not have to. Again, no one's going to notice if your pillars are reflecting a little bit of that red behind it through the, the cracks in the pillars or whatever. And if you do decide to do it, they do not have to be perfect. Just put a tiny bit of color in there. And onward. This does take a little bit of fine motor skills, but don't stress if you go outside or inside the lines. Just don't stress about it because there are ways to fix it. And also no one will notice. But if you're going slow, taking your time, turning your paper when it doesn't feel natural to get into different places, like the bottom of these windows, I know I want to come in from the bottom because I want the tip of my brush to move along those. I don't want to be using the side of my brush for the most part. Although you can, whatever's comfortable. Just getting into all those little spaces. Every once in a while, I'm re-upping my water and that Venetian red that I've mixed. And if you do something like this, if you notice, I put in some Venetian red and it's darker than my initial base coat, don't worry about it. It'll all work itself out as we keep going with this. Your greenery should be dry at the bottom. My wrist is sitting on my greenery. It's fine. If it bothers you or if you're worried about it, you could always put a piece of paper under your hand to buffer anything that, you know, and getting any oils on the paper, but I don't worry about that often. Or sometimes I'll stick my hand under my wrist like this to kind of bump it up, but you don't have to. I'd say the only thing to take note of is down here, these little keystones, and then the shutters on the windows. Make sure you're going around those, but otherwise. The keystones, the shutter, and the window. And if it's really light and you can't tell, just take your best guess. Again, no one will know. And when you get to your the little trees down here, if you already painted them in, just hug the lines. You might think you're far off from finishing, but you're really not. When you think about it, the next plan of action we're going to do is make our bricks, add some shadow to the rotunda, add a little yellow to the rotunda, brighten up any contrast, spots of contrast, finish out those bushes, and I would say you're pretty close to done. And you can sit here and tweak these all day. It's so easy to just keep going and going and going, but at some point you do have to just step back. All right, so I'm going to say take about 2 more minutes to color in that rotunda as best you can, because in about 2 minutes, I'm going to show you how we're going to make these bricks. So your rotunda, you probably don't have, it's probably pretty dry, almost. Give it a minute just to be safe. But when you go to add these bricks, you do not want your surface to be wet. So when I go to add my bricks, I'm going to start at the top where I started initially, so I know that it's dry. And when you want to make the bricks, you're going to take the Venetian red right off the palette. And if it's really, really dark, add a little bit of water. It doesn't matter, because no matter what you do here, it's going to be darker than that base coat because it's adding on to it. And what I'm going to do is just follow the lines. So I'm going to do little sections at a time, following the curves or the lines of the building. So for this part, for instance, and watch, I'm using the side of my brush, just the tip of the brush, just running it along. These do not have to be perfect. I promise you, don't stress. but I'm using just the tip of my brush, and bricks are alternating. So I'm making little, let me get really close here for you. So I am making little lines with the tip of my brush. Some are small, some are big. Don't get stressed about size. This is just going to give the illusion of bricks. And then the row beneath it is alternating. So that's one section. Now I'm going to follow the lines on the other section here. It's hard to do with my camera, but.
What color you got there?
Venetian red, the same one you just used, just without water, or I mean, a little bit of water, obviously. You just want it to be a tad darker than the one underneath it. And with these bricks, you're just following the lines, alternating if you can. They don't have to be perfect. You're just giving the illusion. Another thing to note too, if you are not on the, you don't like details like that, that is so fine. Let me show you how you can make the look, the illusion of bricks without doing those teeny tiny details. I know those are not for everybody. So watch what I can do. I'll do it down here on this wall. I'm just going to trail my brush ever so slightly across, just kind of blotting it along. So I'm not making the bricks, I'm just pulling it along, but keeping that direction of the building, picking it up every once in a while. So you're looking like you're making little lines, but they're not perfect. And this is another alternative to making little bricks. I could make bricks, trust me. I can make bricks down here till I turn blue in the face. I just did that. I can do this. I can make little tiny details, but again, this is not for everybody. So you can just drag your brush across. As long as it's in a fairly straight line, following the line and the curves of the building, you'll be good to go. But again, you can make bricks down here too. It just really takes a light touch with your brush. You're going to follow along all these little sections here. This definitely do not look up close at this, guys. This is what you pull away from your face and you say, oh yeah, I get that. That's bricks. Those are bricks. And we're going to go in and even give, you know, we'll give this contrast before the class is over, but you'll be able to see and really delineate between these sections. But for now, take that Venetian red and along this curve now, I'm going to make bricks. But if you don't want to make bricks, you can just, like I said, drag that line and kind of skip over the line a little bit. Alternating underneath it. Just remembering to follow the contour of the building, especially this round part. Your bricks are a different shade of the other bricks to the left, no big deal. Just make sure you have enough water on that brush to sustain a brush stroke. But it might look even better if you have dry brushing because these are bricks and they're organic and they're not perfect. So already just taking a step away from this, you are seeing your rotunda come together. Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to show you how you're going to add contrast to this, to the different sections of your rotunda. So I always do the bricks first, and then, and if you want to just stop for 2 seconds to pay attention, if you want, you absolutely don't have to. Remember, I'm going to record the rest, but the Purulene Maroon, take a little bit of that maroon. I would water it down, that Purulene Maroon, water it down a little bit. And this is where you can go in and start to add contrast over the bricks. Now I'm looking at that saying, whoa, that's way too dark. Totally fine. I'm going to put a little color in there because the light does not touch this section of the rotunda, and then pull it with some water. Your bricks might disappear a little bit. That's okay. You can always go in and add more, the illusion of them later. And then watch what I do here. I'm going to take a little bit of water, no more pigment, and pull this out just a little bit. See how I'm pulling this darkness out? Just to maybe the third or fourth brick. So now when I look at it, I know that this is covered in darkness, and I know that it's starting to show a little bit in the light here as we go forward. So that's how you add the darkness. That's what your layers look like on the rotunda. So you do the base layer of Venetian red, go in and add your little bricks detail with Venetian red, even more concentrated. Then once that's dry, you can go over with the maroon and add your contrast to where the dark spots would be. Okay, believe it or not, it's 7 o'clock. It is so crazy how fast time flies, but I'm a true proponent of, well, I believe that adults have attention spans as well as 6-year-old children I used to teach. So if you still feel like you want to power through and keep going, maybe go back to those bushes, definitely do that. If you need a break, you're not alone. I don't do one painting in a whole sitting. Yeah, it's okay. I know it is a little stressful, so get up and take a break every 10 minutes. I work super fast and I still get up probably 2 or 3 times within a painting. I don't do it all in one session. So with that, take a deep breath. I hope that you look at this from afar. I'm telling you, please set this on your shelf, walk away from it. And oh my gosh, it looks great. Jan, that's great. I see your darkness. I see your contrast. Just go easy on yourself. So the plan now, what's that?
Can I ask a question?
Sure, sure.
All the lines on the rotunda on the white stuff, do you then go back over that as well with a different color?
Great question. I'm going to highlight that in the video. So obviously we still have a lot to finish, but just to give you an idea of what I do, I take a little bit of Payne's gray. I'm going to place it. I don't know if you can see the video still, if they spotlight it or not, but just to show you real quick, I place a little tiny bit of Payne's gray where the darkness would be. And then I pull it out. So see, there's a little bit of Payne's gray, pull out that Payne's gray, and that's about all I do. You could also underline some of these, like this whole section would probably be Payne's gray because it's hidden from the light. But when you're working with white, I always recommend taking in a little bit of gray or Payne's gray or even light blue. That cerulean would work as well. But I do want to honor your time. So I want to wrap up for today, my portion. But what I'm going to do, I probably do it now since I'm already geared up to do it. I'll probably film the rest, the entire rest of this painting. I'm going to walk you through it here. I'll even put some audio to it so that when you're ready to complete it, you will have the rest of the instructions there for you. And then that'll be good too, because you can pause it, do whatever I'm working on, unpause it, and keep going. But I give yourself credit. This is a really tough subject matter. There's a lot of strategy that goes into it. It's not just like a big bouquet of loose flowers. You're doing really detailed work. So I'm super proud of you. I hope you are proud of you. I will finish out the rest of this and send that to you so you have it to reference for later. But I'm happy to take any questions now. Please let me know what you're thinking.
So Samantha, I think Kim has gone. I'm Laura Gibson. I'm a part of the UVA Club of DC, and we want to thank you. So what you will receive from us is you'll receive 2 videos. You'll receive the Zoom portion that our Office of Engagement is recording, and then you'll have an addenda, you'll have an added video that Samantha's going to be recording. So it will be in 2 parts. Usually we post our videos publicly, but we're not with this one. You guys will all get this video, but you won't be able to find it in the normal places where the club posts their events. So it may, I'm not in control of it. The Office of Engagement in Charlottesville is in charge of all the video production. So you probably won't have it tomorrow, but I will send it as soon as I get it. And please visit Samantha's website, look at all of her beautiful stuff. Also, once you're done, please post your paintings. You'll see Kim put some stuff on the chat where to post it, because we'd love to see them. And I'm hoping once things become in person, maybe we can organize another event with Samantha in person, whether it's calligraphy or cherry blossoms or whatever else she paints. So, but thank you guys. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask now. And And thank you so much, Samantha.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you all so much.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
Bye.
Hey, Samantha, when you post the rest of the video, are you going to say what colors go in which sections too?
Oh, for sure. Yes,
Okay,
I definitely will. Yeah.
Okay, this is awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thanks, Samantha. That was so much fun.
Good.
Thank
Good.
you.
Oh, that looks so great. Awesome. I'm so proud of you guys. It really just takes some time to sit down, figure out logistics, technique,
Yeah,
and you can just run with it. Yeah.
awesome. My daughter's into watercolors. My husband just started doing watercolors, and I was like, I need to try them too. Thank
Awesome.
you.
And you went right to the advanced. You're good.
Thanks, Lori. Thanks, UVA Club. Appreciate it.
Bye, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Samantha. Thank you, Bev.